to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, May 19th, 2015, getting into the week here almost, we're getting into the latter half of May. Next weekend, of course, Memorial Day weekend and the official start of summer, which is going to be a hard sell in some of the parts of the U.S., which are still dealing with snow and frost warnings and all the rest of that other stuff. We'll be talking about that a little later in the show. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick little program note, Thursday, in our third hour, Donald Jeffries, the author of Hidden History, will be our guest. And it is a very well-written book, very concise overview of all of these cover-ups and deceptions that we have all been researching together over the last 21 years. All righty, let's turn to the news here. The U.S. government is taking the position that ISIS capture of Ramadi is a setback. That's actually the words they're using. We're talking about a major city in Iraq overrun by the Iraqi people. The U.S. forces had to flee. The pro-puppet regime forces had to flee, dropped their weapons. They're all being picked up by the Iraqi people. Now, this label of ISIS has become a paintbrush the U.S. government uses to hide from you, the American people, that what's really going on in Iraq, in Yemen, in Libya, various other places around the world, is that all these people living in countries under U.S. puppet rule are sick and tired of it. They've had enough. They want their countries back. That's what's going on. But the U.S. government is going to have a very hard time convincing Americans to send their children off to be killed and crippled to reconquer a conquered province that refuses to stay conquered. All to make the money junkies rich. So they've concocted this uber enemy, ISIS, just like Emmanuel Goldstein out of George Orwell's 1984. It's a villain you're supposed to hate without reason, without question. Scream your 2-minute hate at Emmanuel ISIS. And then fling your babies onto the designated bayonets. And that's basically what's going on. Anybody standing up to U.S. imperialism is simply labeled as ISIS. So you'll think about all those concocted videos that came out of Rita Katz's site intelligence group and say, oh, they're bad people. Of course we must go kill them. They're not bad people. They're just people who want control of their country back from foreign rule. A growing trend, both here and abroad. Now, up in Ukraine, very interesting article that we're seeing out of Pravda. And it's supported by a lot of recent developments. When Kerry went up there to talk with their foreign minister Lavrov and Vladimir Putin, and they're backing off. They're looking for a plan B. They're seeking a graceful exit. And they're trying to disengage or de-escalate the situation in Ukraine, primarily because the U.S. government, I think, is realizing they don't have the resources to continue all these wars on all these fronts simultaneously, and they're having to pick and choose. They want to go back to slapping around helpless, defenseless countries they know they can defeat, like North Korea. And Kerry's already out there saying, we've got to engage with North Korea because we know we can beat them. All righty, let's see. Kiev forces shelled Donetsk Republic 29 times over the past 24 hours. 1 person killed. I'm glad it's only 1 person killed, but that's lousy shooting. On the other hand, the people firing that artillery realize they're firing that artillery at their fellow countrymen. That's going to affect the aim a little tiny bit. Let's just take this crank over here a few more degrees to the west. It's not working very well. Now, Ukraine's parliament, reacting to demands for repayment from Russia for gas debts, repayment of all the loans they've gotten from IMF, ECB, every place else. Their parliament has now approved a new law saying they have a right of moratorium on foreign debt payments. It's now the law in Kiev. We don't have to pay you back all the money that we borrowed from you, at least not yet. We'll decide when we will do it. And you would think that might be the death knell for Kiev, but the U.S. government has now issued a loan guarantee for Kiev for $1 billion, which means if Kiev borrows the money and doesn't pay it back, you, the generous American taxpayer, will make good on that loan. Kiev is taking the money to spend on more military spending to escalate these wars. It is a bad position. Now, there's a very insightful article over at Global Research up in Canada. U.S. wakes up to new Silk World Order. And they're talking about the recent Victory Day parade in Moscow, where a lot of Western leaders said, we can't be bothered. Russia declaring victory in World War II. How ridiculous. We won it. I saw it in the movies. The United States, John Wayne won World War II. And a lot of people have commented on the fact that China's president was shoulder to shoulder with Russia's president in the reviewing stand. But there were even more telling indicators, because Chinese troops marched in the parade itself. Even under Stalin Mao, Chinese troops did not join Russia's Victory Day parade. They are sending a clear message. Russia and China are now a bloc and should be considered a single entity for those who are trying to plan wars. War on one is war on both. Down in Lebanon, their army has shelled militants as Nusra and ISIS clash on the northeast border. So that's kicking up again here. Now, we've been talking about this for a while. The U.S. government, in order to try and ease the possibility of an Iranian nuclear deal, is basically saying we will support other nations in the Mideast arming themselves against a possible potential down the road, doesn't exist, nobody can prove they're building one, but just in case, nuclear weapon. Saudi Arabia took it one more step. They are already in talks with Pakistan to buy nuclear weapons, to arm themselves against the non-existent nuclear weapons up in Iran. I don't think so. I think Saudi Arabia is seeing a once-in-a-lifetime political opportunity to achieve nuclear parity with Israel at a time when nobody can wag their finger at them and saying, no, you shouldn't proliferate nuclear weapons here. We've got to defend ourselves against Iran. Really? That's all we're thinking about is Iran. Obama told us we could arm against Iran. And I think Saudi Arabia is seeing this opportunity to become a nuclear power so that Israel can't be quite the bully to them that Israel would like to be. And I'm sure Israel's going to find some way, some reason to scream about how Saudi Arabia can't have nuclear weapons, which nobody's going to listen to because we now know Israel has nuclear weapons. They've had them since the 1970s. They've got hydrogen bombs. They've got neutron bombs, which, by the way, are weapons of invasion. Because a neutron bomb is a bomb designed to kill all the people in a city without harming the city itself. And that means whoever's using it wants to move in and take over the city. Neutron bombs are weapons of aggression. They are not defensive. Now, I saw this interesting article over at the New York Post. It's an editorial saying it's time to give Israel the means to take out the Iranian nukes, and they're talking about the U.S. giving to Israel the latest generation of the super bunker busters, the mother of all bombs, the GBU-57, 30,000-pound bunker buster bomb. We've got to give them to Israel. Now, there's no guarantee that Israel's not going to go ahead and use them against Iran's civilian nuclear power station, even if there are no nuclear weapons, even if there is no threat. Iran has not initiated a war of conquest against another country in over 200 years. These days, Israel can't seem to go 3 months without attacking somebody somewhere. Neither can the U.S. Now, when we come back from this commercial break, more reasons why this is a bad idea to be giving these weapons to Israel. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about this editorial in the New York Post saying that the U.S. government should give to Israel the GB-57 Super Bunker Buster 30,000-pound bomb so that Israel can defend itself from Iran's nuclear weapons, which Iran doesn't actually have. Iran's nuclear weapons are no more real than Iraq's nuclear weapons. That's the starting point here. But they're out there saying, got to give these weapons to Israel. And that's really kind of a stupid thing to do, because you need to remember, Israel was at the forefront of claims that Iraq was making nuclear weapons. Israel bombed Iraq's civilian nuclear power station at Osirak in 1981, and then cheered the U.S. on for the invasion of Iraq in 2003 because they've got nuclear weapons of mass destruction. Now today, even the staunchest war hawks are having to admit that Iraq, okay, they didn't really have nuclear weapons and they weren't building any. And post-invasion inspection of the ruins at Osirak found nothing but a civilian nuclear power station. So now the New York Post wants to give Israel the ability to repeat that Osirak mistake at Bushehr and shower yet another innocent civilian population with radioactivity. That does not strike me as a productive course of action. Israel can't be trusted with weapons. They attack people without cause. Now, Israel is out there screaming. They're still trying to derail this P5+1 deal, and they're screaming that this recent deal in which Iran purchased used aircraft represents a violation of the sanctions by Iran, and on that basis, the P5+1 should be scrapped. Now, technically, it wasn't Iran who violated the sanctions. It was the people who sold those used aircraft to Iran who violated the sanctions. Iran has never agreed to the sanctions. This is just Israel trying to say, they're bad, go hurt them. And I wish Israel would just shut the heck up, because I'm sick and tired of hearing from them. I wish they'd go polish their nuclear weapons or something. Stop abusing our ears with all of this whining and crying and playing victim and pity us. Oh, my goodness here. Piers Morgan, who is no longer at CNN because of his terrible ratings, and never went back to Great Britain because Jeremy Clarkson was there at the border with a rifle to keep him out. He's over there writing in journals where he's still considered a contributor that it's time for all-out war in the Middle East. Don't need a reason, don't need a rhyme, just it's coming, let's just go ahead and do it. Okay, Piers, if you really feel that way, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your Dayglow orange jumpsuit, go have fun. We'll tell them that you are on your way to kick their butt all by yourself. The rest of us, we're going to stay home, because we are sick and tired of being lied and tricked into wars of conquest to make the money junkies richer than they already are. We've had enough of it. We're a war-weary people. We have been in this new world war, this war to force the world back to Bretton Woods and the petrodollar, longer than we were in World War I, longer than we were in World War II. Enough is enough is enough. It's a failed policy. It is failing. It is time to say, all right, we're not going to be able to complete this agenda, and we're going to wreck the nation by continuing. All righty. Here's an interesting little story that came out of Press for Truth up in Canada. Apparently there was a survey done among American students who basically came out and said that they see Canada as a dictatorship. Because even though they have the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, under Canadian law, the government is allowed to violate those rights, as long as it's demonstrably justified to the government to do it. They can violate your rights whenever they want, which means they're never really rights, they're privileges, from a master to particularly obedient slaves. Here in the United States, it's a different situation, technically. Rights are rights, are rights, are rights. The Bill of Rights does not grant us our rights, Common Core notwithstanding. The Bill of Rights recognizes our rights. Those are the black lines the government is not allowed to step across. Our government does step across, but they don't have a legal justification for doing so, and every time the government steps across those lines, they delegitimize themselves. We have an illegal, illegitimate government in this country when it is refusing to comply with that original contract with America, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Another article from, it was a YouTube video. Canadian government just killed free speech, which they did with their new laws, saying, you can speak about anything we haven't killed free speech. You can talk about anything you want to at all in Canada, except Israel. This is from Prime Minister Harper. And free speech is an absolute. You either have it or you don't. If you're allowed to speak freely only about certain government-approved topics, then it's not free speech. It's permitted speech. And permitted speech is not free. Free speech means you can say whatever you want to say, and there is no guarantee in the Constitution that protects you from being offended by somebody else's statement. And the correct response is to use your freedom of speech to stand up and say, I think you are wrong, and here is why. And let the listeners hear both sides of an argument and decide for themselves. When you have somebody get up and say, we cannot have the other side of the argument, they are confessing that they know they could not prevail in a debate on the facts, law, and logic of their position. It has to be enforced through dogma. And that is not freedom of speech. That is tyranny and dictatorship. Now, David Cameron, of course, riding high on his his victory in the recent elections in Great Britain, is out there declaring there will be no more independence votes in Scotland because, after all, we stole that independence referendum fair and square, and that should settle the matter. Well, Scotland doesn't agree. And they're basically saying that, yes, there will be a new independence referendum, and this time they're going to be keeping a very close eye on exactly how that referendum is being run. After all, the in-your-face, caught on photos, caught on video, massive fraud that was going on in that referendum. The powers that be don't even care if you see that they're stealing the election. Maybe they're thinking if we steal enough elections in everybody's face, they'll quit demanding to have elections and we can save money for that. Let's see. We're getting a bunch of phone calls, but we are coming up on a commercial break, so I'm going to leave the phone calls into the next segment here. Down in Israel, the Ethiopian Jews are once again in the streets protesting discrimination. They're very angry over Israel's government statement that they can either go back to Africa where they came from or they can go to jail. Can you imagine some white politician saying that in the U.S., how the corporate media would respond? Why does Israel get a free pass on that high degree of racism? We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. The phone lines are really loading up. I'm going to start taking calls after a couple of quick stories here. We're looking at a report coming out of RINF.com. Syrian war set to re-explode. And we're paired up with another story where John Kerry is out there saying it's time to ramp up pressure on North Korea. Well, what's going on here is the U.S. government is realizing they can't go up against a combined Russia-China. So they're going to back off, they're going to reprioritize the wars, and they're going to go back to slapping around little tiny helpless countries that they know they can beat. They've been trying to get Assad out of Syria for 4 years now, so they're redoubling that effort. Now we're going to go after North Korea because we know we can whip against them and show how we are victorious. All righty, let's see. We're going to grab a phone call. Steve in Massachusetts, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk to you about a documentary I saw.
Yes.
And it's called Zionist Story. And it tells about the Jewish people, how they migrated to Palestine and the atrocities they've done to the Palestinian people.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, like you said in earlier shows, how the Palestinian people have less and less land. And the Jews are pretty much were at will. And,
well, can we change our term of craft here, please? Because I prefer the word Israelis to Jews, because there's a lot of Jews on the planet who aren't in that particular area of the world, and they're not really part of the problem. This is the actions of the government of Israel against the Palestinian people. So let's sort of keep things focused down, okay?
Okay, yeah, and well, for them to say that the Holocaust was really bad, and it was, but for them to turn around and do something to another people, I mean, how is that justified?
Well, they use that legend to justify what they're doing, and it really is a major propaganda victory for them, because coming out of World War II, the Zionists They were looking at that Balfour Declaration, and these transplanted European Jews who are actually descended from Central Asian Khazars. They're not actually Hebrew blood. But, they're caught up with their religion, and this is our homeland, and we want it, and they didn't want anything else. I mean, Adolf Hitler was going to give the Jewish people Madagascar for their homeland, which is a lot bigger and actually a lot more fertile than that area. But no, we've got to have Jerusalem, we've got to have this. And but at the end of World War II, the Zionists faced a major problem. The world had just united together and sacrificed much blood and treasure to defeat Nazi Germany on the principle that one nation does not have the right to simply march into another nation and take it for their use. And yet that is exactly what the Zionists wanted to do to Palestine. So the Zionists, the founders of Israel, they needed a public relations device that was so powerful that all of these same nations that had said, no, Germany cannot just march into Poland and take it for its own use, would turn around and say, well, I guess it's okay for Israel to go into Palestine and take that for their own use. And that was the point at which concentration camps, slave labor camps became death camps, delousing became gassing, typhus became, the symptoms of typhus became evidence of genocide. But you need to remember, in the books that were written by Eisenhower, Truman, Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill about the events of World War II, there's not a word in there about intentional genocide by Germany against anybody. What they describe is a nation whose infrastructure had been bombed into collapse, and during those last few months before the surrender of Germany, typhus just ripped across the entire country. May have even been biological warfare with the speed with which it just erupted across the country. And it was killing everybody, both inside and outside those slave labor camps, the inmates and the guards. And Germany was trying desperately to curtail it, by fumigating all the clothes and the people, with insecticide to kill the lice, which is the vector through which typhus transforms. But they basically changed all of these things and recast it as, Germany was trying to exterminate the Jewish people, therefore we must have our own homeland. And that was how Israel succeeded in getting the world's permission to say, yeah, what Germany could not be allowed to do to France, we have permission to do to Palestine. And that's why they guard and protect that Holocaust legend so jealously, because their entire reason for being rests on it. And that's why they're just absolutely furious with anybody who raises any questions whatsoever, even about the parts of the story that have already been proven false, like the soap. That's turned out to be false. The lampshade myth, that was proven to be false. There are no mass graves at Treblinka. Ground-penetrating radar shows that. And yet, this story, even at Auschwitz, they changed the number of people who were killed there. They lowered it by 2.5 million, but that most holy 6 million figure never changes. And by the way, they were using that in World War I as well as World War II. It was a propaganda device. And that's why they're still just adamant about keeping that and protecting it, because without that, Israel is seen as doing to Palestine exactly what Hitler did to France and Poland and the rest of it, and they don't want that image.
Yeah, that was my next question about how many Jews were actually in the Holocaust that were killed, but I think it was exaggerated.
Well, the Red Cross figures, show nowhere near 6 million of anybody dying in those slave labor camps, and the vast majority of them did die of disease and typhus. Only a few people were actually executed by the Nazis, and they were generally people who were trying to break out or committed other offenses. The reality is that prior to World War II, there were only 600,000 Jews in that part of Europe and Germany to begin with. We've got the newspaper documentation on that. It is a fantasy for political gain, just like torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. Pearl Harbor was a surprise. The Lusitania wasn't carrying weapons. This is how governments control and rule you and get your consent for their policies. Lies, fraud, and deception. That's basically throughout all of history.
One more thing real quick.
Yeah.
Since GMO won't label the foods, what I've been doing is I've been finding products that say non-GMO. Maybe we can start that movement.
Well, see, unfortunately, Monsanto is now lobbying the U.S. government and also the entire world through these trade agreements to make GMO labeling illegal, where you can't say whether your product has GMO or not. They want to ban companies from saying GMO free.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I mean, that's the tyranny that we're living in right now.
Yeah, I thought my little plan was going to work, but that's what I've been doing.
Monsanto's way ahead of you. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to John in Barbados real quick before the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Just going back to the VE parade in Moscow, along with the Chinese, there was a large Indian delegation, including several battalions of Indian troops marching.
Well, that's not surprising when you consider that India and Russia are partners through the BRICS arrangement.
Well, the other thing I wanted to comment on was this Cameron statement, that Britain is too tolerant. And I tend to agree with that. I mean, why should I tolerate the greedy bankers? Why should I tolerate?
That's not what Cameron's talking about. Cameron is talking about they're too tolerant of people saying things that are politically incorrect. And he's basically talking about even if you are perfectly in compliance with the law, the government still has the right to come in and order you not to talk about certain things, not to post certain things. And the British public is up in arms about that. It absolutely is, right out of George Orwell's 1984. And it's basically dictatorship. It's the end of freedom of speech.
Well, it's backlashing on them because people are feeling like me. I mean, if abiding by the law means nothing, they're still going to come after me. Why should I bother abiding by the law?
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. If you're still going to be punished for following the law, why not go out and break the law? You're right. This is going to backflash. Got to let you go here, John. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Turning to the economy around the world, Greece, of course, is in serious, serious trouble. Over 200,000 Greeks have now applied for humanitarian crisis relief because Syriza, the party that won the last election, has gone back on their promises to break Greece free from the debt slavery of the money junkies, and they're simply looting what's left in the country to keep on making payments on this hideous debt, which we know at least half of it qualifies as odious debt because it arose out of this underhanded deal between former Greek leader Papandreou and Goldman Sachs to try and conceal Greece's already out-of-control debt with a series of currency swaps. Goldman Sachs made a huge amount of money on the deal. Papandreou looked good till he left office, and the incoming government looked at the actual bookkeeping and said, oh boy, are we in trouble? And that's an important thing to remember. The people of Greece did not put themselves into this mess. The people of Greece don't deserve this abuse. The people of Greece did nothing wrong. It was done to them by the money junkies, a pattern that has repeated across the globe. We are in an age in which greed, contrary to Wall Street, is not good. And I think the whole point of the movie Wall Street was saying greed is good was to underscore the fact that there are too many people who think personal greed is just fine. And it doesn't matter who gets hurt, because I get the goodies. And that actually came out of an economist by the name of Adam Smith, who came up with this idea that if everybody in the banking sector was just insanely personally greedy, the system as a whole would improve. And the money junkies just absolutely loved that because it justified being personally greedy, of having more supercars and watches and houses than the next guy. And they cling to that by saying, yes, I'm just grabbing all this money to myself, but Adam Smith says I'm helping the system as a whole. Now, there was another guy, John Nash, who won the Nobel Prize in mathematics. He was the subject of the movie A Beautiful Mind, starring Russell Crowe. And for his doctoral thesis, he showed why Adam Smith was absolutely wrong. That when everybody is personally greedy and looking out for themselves, the system will lock up. But nobody wanted to listen to John Nash. He was a crazy guy anyway. No, Adam Smith is right. I'm allowed to be greedy. And we're in an age where we're seeing that out-of-control greed and this social attitude that greed is good and that it's okay to tolerate extreme greed is literally tearing our entire world apart. We're seeing the people of Cyprus paying the price for that belief, seeing the people of Greece pay the price for that belief. We're seeing the people here in the United States of America paying the price for that belief. Greed is bad. Greed for more than you need for a comfortable life for yourself and your family is destructive of the system as a whole. Even the IMF is hemming and hawing and hedging around the fact that having a public currency loaned at interest into circulation is the root of all these problems. So now they're over there with 200,000 Greek people applying for humanitarian crisis relief. Now we're hearing that Greece, the government of Greece, the central government, may start confiscating savings accounts the way they did over in Cyprus. Because there's one thing about a money junkie. Doesn't matter how much money you give them today, they want more tomorrow. Here in the United States of America, the Atlanta Federal Reserve has dropped their estimate of GDP growth to under 1%. And they may even be fudging that a little bit. We're seeing another article over at Investment Watch blog that when you get past all the propaganda and the rigged numbers, the U.S. is already back in recession. And we're heading into a depression. In fact, we may never have really, truly left the recession that began with the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud in 2008. Up in Alaska, even with all their oil revenues, they're in fiscal trouble. State employees are being warned of possible layoffs because Alaska's state budget is in an impasse, and their fiscal year starts July 1st, and if they don't have a new approved budget, they're going to be letting those people go. Here in the U.S., Walmart failed to reach its estimate for retail sales this last month. And this is significant because, remember, those low first quarter consumer numbers were blamed on the exceedingly cold and brutal winter, which you're all supposed to forget about as soon as Obama starts talking about his carbon tax. But obviously, as we get into April and the weather was cool but not brutally so, people still aren't buying. They're keeping their cash at home. They're not sure about the future, and they certainly don't want to borrow money to buy consumer items because, unlike the U.S. government and Wall Street, Americans want to know they can make those payments back. The American people, by and large, are honorable people. They're willing to borrow money, but only if they have confidence they're going to be able to trade their labor for enough wages and salaries to pay those loans back. And that's what makes the system work. And obviously, Americans don't have that confidence. They're seeing about all these layoffs. I mean, there was a story one of the members just put up here about, let me skip on to, Iowa spent $50 million to lure IBM to their state. Huzzah, huzzah, we've got jobs. 50% of the people have already been laid off. People look at stories like that and say, yeah, maybe I got a job now, but I don't know if I'm still going to have this job 3 months, 6 months down the road. I'm not going to take on another loan. I'm not going to buy a new car, take on car payments. I certainly can't do a mortgage right now. And for an entire economy where consumer spending was supposed to be done on credit rather than cash, that's a major hammer blow. And this economy is doomed until money starts being brought back down to the bottom level, to the workers and to the rapidly shrinking middle class, in order to pour back into that system. And until they do that, this economy absolutely is doomed. It's being kept up through market rigging and asset buying and just shaking things back and forth to make them look like they're more valuable. That can't last forever. Turning to the international news, story out of Refreshing News 99, more confirmation that the United States was smuggling guns to Syria from Libya through that Benghazi consulate. It was sort of a foreign version of Fast and Furious. They went to shut it down and said, hey, let's make a big staged terror attack that makes Obama look good, because he was trailing in the polls with Mitt Romney at the time here. Matt Taibbi over at Rolling Stone is out with another winning article. I'm a huge admirer of this guy. I wish I could get him on the show. And he's basically out there saying, forget what we know now. We knew back then the Iraq War was a joke. See, here we are in 2015, and everybody's saying, yeah, Iraq was a mistake. There were no weapons of mass destruction. Golly gee, is our face red? It was an intelligence failure. No, it wasn't. It was outright lies and fabrications. We documented it in an article on my website back when it was all starting, back in 2003. The lie of the century. I've had to change the title now to the lie of the last century, but it's up there on the permanent menu, and it goes down all the absolute frauds and deceptions. The claim that Iraq was importing yellow cake from Niger that was based on forged documents, the claim that these British-manufactured balloon inflators were mobile biological weapons laboratories, and all of that. How many times do you have to be lied to before you accept this government controls you by lying to you about everything? In fact, this government doesn't dare tell you the truth even once. They're afraid you might learn to tell the difference. Alrighty, we're coming up here on our top of the hour news segment. When we come on back, well, here's one more thing I'm going to throw out there. There has been a list leaked that shows that a lot of those protesters in Ferguson who were trying to stir up trouble were being paid to do it by a George Soros front group. It was staged. They were trying to kick up race riots to declare a national emergency and martial law. Thank all of you who were smart enough not to fall for it. We'll be back after the news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Before we get to this next phone call, I'm looking at the corporate media, and they are really pushing this idea that the United States must go back into Iraq now because ISIS has taken Ramadi, and if the United States does not act, it shows a failure to lead. They're selling another Iraq war to you, the American people. Not against ISIS, but against the people of Iraq who want their country back. This is the third time your children have been thrown into Iraq to be killed and crippled so that Iraq's oil is sold only for the U.S. dollar, so that Iraq's government will be a puppet of the U.S. regime and do as they're told. It's part of the new American empire. And there are many parallels between what's going on right now in the United States of America and what led to the decline and fall of ancient Rome. Overextended military, too many provinces breaking away, too much debt, and rulers who are borderline insane. Do you think only Rome had people like Nero and Caligula? Look at all these scandals about child molestation among political leaders and religious leaders around the world. There's something very wrong with these people that we allow into positions of power and authority. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. I'm going to take a guess at how to pronounce your name, and forgive me if I botch it. Buxo, is that how it's pronounced?
Buslow.
Buslow. Oh, I see. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. What's on your mind today?
Mike, I got a philosophical question for you concerning Greece.
Okay.
If a country falls in the middle of an economic collapse and there's no one there to pay out on the credit default swaps, has the country really fallen?
I like that. That's funny. That is really very good.
I mean, honestly, they've set it up now that no matter what happens in Greece, the banks, who are their own regulatory agency, as far as credit default swaps are concerned, say, no, it isn't a default. So if it isn't a default, how would you define the default then?
Well, see, that's always the question that's going to happen. What is going to happen for these holders of credit default swaps is they will sue. We are already seeing civil lawsuits being brought by people who purchase credit default swaps, or in the case I'm specifically referring to, interest rate swaps. And the sellers of the swaps refuse to pay on them, and now they're being taken to court. And at some point, you know, it's like a game of musical chairs. You know, we're short a chair here. Somebody's going to have to leave the game. And eventually pretty much everybody does. So,
in the beginning, though, but didn't they already know up front that these are unregulated? So they can come back and say, well, sorry, you're out. Just like the banks are saying that you're not really depositors, you're creditors.
Well, these are all symptoms of an economy in decline. When the economy was booming up, credit default swaps were big business. It was money coming in through the door and not going out. People bought the credit default swaps because it mitigated their risk. That in turn affected some of their other risk management costs. And it all made a lot of sense. As long as the economy continued to grow, it was actually a very good thing to be doing. But derivatives as a class of financial instruments, when the economy's going up, derivatives played correctly can make you very, very rich in a very, very short time. When the economy turns against you, so do the derivatives, and they can make you very, very poor very, very quickly. And the bankers are all scrambling to find ways to dump those losses onto ordinary people because that, after all, is what makes a fascist economic dictatorship function up until the point of final collapse.
But, Mike, don't you think either way, no matter how this pans out, that in the overall grander scheme of things, that it's going to have reverberations through the financial markets? Because let's say they don't pay out. Well, then obviously the guys holding the credit default swaps will be pretty close to near ruin, right?
That's exactly right.
Then Europe is going to fall left and right.
Yeah, you're exactly right. There's going to be a crash. What they're doing now is trying to make sure the crash hits somebody else. That's what all this game playing is about. They cannot stop the crash. They know it's coming. What they're all doing now is trying to say, okay, we don't want the crash to hit us on Wall Street, so we're going to dump the crash onto the people who bought the credit default swaps and the people that they owe money to, and, of course, inevitably the American taxpayer. That's what's going on, is picking where the crash hits. You know, we can't stop the asteroid from smacking planet Earth. Let's nudge it so it hits somebody else's real estate.
Yeah, I understand that. But, Mike, I have one final question for you. Is it enough to know anymore about all this when there's no resolution to any of it?
Well, there is a resolution. The resolution is going to be the crash, and
yeah, but how does that help you and me?
Well,
you know?
How you and I, we need to be prepared to weather that crash and to de-link from the system as much as possible. And I find it very alarming, all this sudden talk about banning cash, because obviously having cash on hand is critical to the survival of ordinary Americans. The bankers don't care about that. They want the cash in their bank where they can use it to play their little banking game. These bankers will not care if 1.5 billion human beings starve slowly to death on this planet as long as the bottom of that bank ledger remains black.
But see, Mike, the thing is right now, like, let's say savers aren't being paid anything in interest right now, so they wind up in part-time jobs which pay them next to nothing. So if that, in essence, is taken away from them through confiscation in the banks, and the economy is drying up to the point where now even McDonald's is laying off people, what does that leave us when the crash comes? I mean, we don't have the money, basically, to put into food and the gold and the silver. And what does it matter anyway? Because gold and silver are driven down at will every day anyhow.
Well, when the big crash comes, gold and silver will explode through the roof. So will storable food.
What's the valued money, though?
No, basically they'll go back to what the actual silver itself was worth. This is why we tell people, if you can't invest in the investor-grade coins and bars, getting what is called junk silver, which is the pre-1965 U.S. coinage. Because when the U.S. economy collapses, people aren't going to be saying, what's this worth in terms of old or new dollars? They're going to say, it's a silver dime, it's a silver quarter, it is a recognized, uniform, trusted unit of value. And that's what people are going to be
running. If I go down to a gas station and say, here's a pre-1964 dime, that this idiot at the gas station is going to know the value of it?
After the crash, yeah. Gas prices will go back to 25 cents a gallon, paid for with a silver quarter.
And I wonder if the supply line will even have any gas coming through the lines anyway.
That is going to be an issue, okay? And if you lack the resources to be making preparations, you have my deepest sympathies. But again, if they're going to ban cash, that's the paper and ink stuff, then obviously if you have any surplus cash, get it out of the bank, put it into physical silver and gold. And yes, at some point the government is going to say turn in your silver and turn in your gold, but if you're buying it in small allotments, they won't know that you've got it. And you'd have to be really foolish to turn it over. Take the lesson from 1933, when Roosevelt outlawed private ownership of gold, investment coins, and bars. The Americans trusted the government. They turned it in. They got a nice stack of ink and paper at $20 per ounce of gold. And then immediately that ink and paper's value was inflated away. This is a huge, huge mess. And yes, the governments and the bankers are not concerned about what happens to you, the ordinary people. They're out to protect their own fortunes, their own wealth, any way that they can. That's what got them into these positions of wealth and power, is an absolute disconnect for any empathy for ordinary people.
Well, Mike, I hope you're right and everything falls into place, but I seriously have my doubts. I mean, I think things are going to be even far worse then than they are now.
They are going to be for a while. Okay, go back and look at the collapse of the Soviet Union. There was about 4 months where the Russian people had to take care of each other to get through it all. Then the new Russian republics formed, and life in Russia today is a heck of a lot better than it was under the Soviet Union. We're going to have to go through the same thing here in the United States of America. It's not going to be a bed of roses. There's going to be a few months of real serious hardship, and we'd better start learning how to take care of each other, or we're not going to get through it, okay? Got to let you...
All right, Mike, thanks for the feedback. I appreciate it.
You got it. We got to let you go for some commercials. We'll be back after these few words. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the corporate media has finally gotten off this, we must go back into Iraq to deal with ISIS nonsense. And they're back on Hillary Clinton's emails. New scandal there. We're going to be talking about it in a few minutes. But first, we're going to take a phone call. Brad in Ohio. Aloha, Brad. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, I'm just wanting to support you and everything about you because we're on the same page. And I'm saying that gold and silver, silver is the best way to go. I have 190 ounces of silver, and I'm sitting back waiting to see the dollar collapse, and I'm
not sure I'd advertise that you have that much silver on a radio station. You don't know if your neighbors are listening. What am I saying? They're not listening to it. No, seriously, it's good that you have the silver, but common sense, for everybody out there who's got physical silver and gold in your home, don't tell anybody. Okay? Little discretion here. But it is good that you have that, and as a matter of fact, we have an article that one of the members put up on the website that in economic downturns, silver actually outperforms gold for the main reason there's so much more of it to be traded. And gold stops escalating in value when the dealers start saying, I'm out, I don't have any more. And it can't be flipped back and forth. Silver's definitely a way to go. It's not being tracked as closely as gold is. There's that huge volume of what is called junk silver out there, which is going to be a recognized, reliable unit of value when the Federal Reserve note collapses. Nobody's going to be out there with a calculator saying, well, I've got this quarter, it's worth so many Federal Reserve. Nobody's going to care about the Federal Reserve note. The Federal Reserve note's going to go the way of the Zimbabwean dollar. And people are going to be doing commerce. Yeah, people are going to be carrying out commerce during this post-collapse, pre-New Republic period using that junk silver. It's a recognized unit of value. 25 cents, and if it's after 1965, not interested. We're not interested in these little copper gain slugs. I forgive me for wandering off on a tangent here. When I was a kid, I collected coins, historically important coins. And I've noticed over the years, when I was a kid and the coinage was made out of solid copper, solid nickel, solid silver, they were deep struck and they were actually quite pretty. But these copper slugs, in order that little thin, shiny, silver-like material doesn't tear, they've had to go to shallow striking, and it makes them look like gas station game tokens. Our money is not only not worth much, it's nowhere near as pretty as it used to be in terms of just the art of coinage. And by the way, for those of you in Germany or headed Germany to Munich, I hope it's still there. I imagine it still is. In the Residence Museum in Munich, they have an entire gallery devoted to medallic art, and some of it is just stunningly beautiful, what you can get onto a single round disc, and it just takes your breath away. And it's not what the coins are worth, it's just as objects of art, they're quite amazing.
Yeah, you're right. It's like I got 65 rounds on my own, plus another rounds that were American dollars, these things are going to be worth something. The electronics are right out of them. The gold is made into electronics.
Yeah, it is a huge market. I remember back when I was working in Hollywood at Robert Abel and Associates, was during the run-up where the Hunt brothers tried to corner the silver market, and silver prices went through the roof. And we literally bought a machine to take our used film and dissolve it for the silver that was in the film emulsion, the silver halide. And for a couple of weeks there, it penciled out, and then silver prices went back down, and it wasn't worth it anymore. But yeah, there's industrial silver uses. There's nano silver. Another good reason to have pure silver is if you need to make nano silver for antibacterial, antiviral use.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. Oh, you are also on the point. I'm like, I got the silver. Silver, what do they call them, plates? They're like,
the bars, yes.
Yeah, the bars.
Yes.
And I can hook my electro up to them and make colloidal silver. That's so cool.
Well, yes, you can. But before I let you go, and I've got an article about making your own nano silver or colloidal silver. It's got to be like absolute pure silver because you don't want those other metals going into the solution. So you can't use like the George Washington silver quarters because they've got other metals in there for durability. It has to be 0.999 or 0.9999 silver in order to make a good product here.
Exactly.
And you got to be careful about that. All right, well, listen, Brad, thank you very much for the phone call. We're coming up on a commercial break.
Thank you.
And do me a favor, don't tell all your friends and neighbors about all the silver you've got, because when the economy comes apart, they're going to be pounding on your door, okay? Just be safe. Be common sense. All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go there. For those of you who are small-scale preppers, you know, and by that I mean you don't have an obvious bunker in your backyard that the neighbors all know about. But for small-scale preppers, if you've got food, water, ammunition, silver, gold in your home, don't tell anybody, huh? You know, that's just common sense. Because otherwise you make yourself a target when things get ugly. And they are going to get ugly. That's just the reality you got to deal with here. All righty, Jeb Bush is out there, still trying to recover from that faux pas of saying, yes, I would invade Iraq. No, maybe Iraq was a mistake. And he's out there saying that Jesus would be the perfect Republican president. Oh, my goodness. Do we not have anybody running for president who's, like, sane and honest and altruistic here? Now, something you need to remember about Jeb Bush. Remember the Project for the New American Century back in the 1990s that put this nation on this idea of we're the remaining superpower, let's act like it and conquer the rest of the world and make them just like us. Jeb Bush was one of the signers on the founding documents of the Project for the New American Century. So he's part of this whole PNAC thing about let's go out and wage war on the world until they live their lives by our leave here. It's the new American imperialism here. We need, you know, if God intended us to vote, he'd give us candidates. Which brings us over to Hillary. State Department has now admitted Hillary Clinton received $500,000 worth of jewelry as a gift from the King of Saudi Arabia. That's a lot of bling. Last time I got a ring for my wife, I had to go through 24 boxes of Cracker Jacks to find that thing. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking at some of the stories that members are posting to whatreallyhappened.com here. And there's one about Saudi Arabia is advertising for more swordsmen because their execution rate is soaring. And then two stories down from it, naked machete-wielding man threatens Long Island Costco. I think there's a match there. I think the recruiters may have an opportunity there to solve two problems. All righty now. Before we went to the break, we're talking about the fact that it has come out that George Soros funded an organization, Missourians Organizing for Reform and Empowerment, or more, and they in turn were actually paying money to the people who were out there in Ferguson, as they put it, simulating chaos. Now let me take a step back here. We know that the U.S. government is itching to find an excuse to declare a national emergency, martial law, suspend the Constitution, and complete the transformation of the United States of America into the fascist states of us, meaning the money junkies. They've tried it before. They tried it with Adam Kokesh's aborted armed march into Washington, D.C. They tried to get race riots across the country going with Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. They tried to do it in Ferguson. They tried to do it with Freddie Gray. And thankfully, Americans, both black and white and in between, are smart enough to realize this is what the government wants. And now we have the proof. This organization got money from George Soros to cause trouble on the streets of Ferguson. And there's an ironic twist to it. Apparently not everybody who was out there on the streets smashing windows and causing a ruckus got paid. They were promised they were going to be paid. They haven't been paid. So now these same people who were protesting in the streets of Ferguson are now demonstrating and protesting, occupying the offices of Missourians Organizing for Reform and Empowerment, saying, hey, we went out and caused this ruckus. We want our money now. Anyway, little irony there. You go to work for Soros. Good luck getting paid here. On a more serious note, a U.S. federal judge has ruled that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's emails during her tenure at the State Department are, in fact, public records and must be released starting immediately. The State Department had originally said they were going to release all of her emails in January of next year, following a very careful review. Review being State Department speak for delete anything potentially embarrassing. And the federal judge has said, no, you start releasing them now. You get them out there now. Now, when this whole private email server situation surfaced, Hillary Clinton made a couple of comments. She claimed that she was using this one server because she didn't want to carry a bunch of different cell phones and devices to deal with her personal versus her private email. That was revealed to be a lie. Photos surfaced showing her with an iPad, a smartphone, and a BlackBerry, and we all know that smartphones can handle multiple email accounts. I've got 4 different ones coming into my iPhone. Hillary also said that she was only using one email address on her server. That, too, has now been revealed to be a lie. And in the latest round of emails to be released, emails have surfaced between Hillary Rodham Clinton and Sidney Blumenthal. And Hillary's excuse is, well, look, Sidney's a personal friend. I used a different email address for him. Well, yeah, and that's going to cause problems for Sidney, who's over now at ABC trying to duck allegations that he is biased toward the Clintons in his reporting. But the problem is the email that surfaced talks about strategies to help oust Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. In other words, this email confirms the U.S. government was behind the ouster of Gaddafi. And remember the motive for that. Gaddafi had kicked out their private central bank. He'd set up a state bank, a value-based currency, the gold dinar, and then he announced to the world that Libya's oil was for sale, but only for the gold dinar. So the U.S. went in there, killed Gaddafi, put in a brand new private central bank. The gold for the gold dinar vanished. Nobody knows where that went, but I can guess. And Libya's oil is back on the world market only for the U.S. dollar. And this email confirms the U.S. hand in the overthrow of Gaddafi's government. Apparently, information is surfacing about Hillary and her ties to Monsanto and her support for GMO and bans on GMO labeling. That's actually starting to undermine a lot of her so-called vagina vote, where Hillary's whole campaign has assumed that every woman in America is going to vote for her because she's a woman and it's time we had a woman president. But most of those women are mothers. They have children. They're concerned about their children's health. They're aware of the controversy about GMO, and now their female woman candidate is shown to be down on the dark side of the GMO force. That's actually harming her. Now, over at the Clinton Foundation, there's a little bit of a kerfuffle going on over there because Chelsea Clinton is vice chairman of the Bill and Hillary Clinton Foundation, and apparently she's a little bit of a martinet to the point where there is a high staff turnover over her abusive behavior of the staff. She is apparently her mother's child in that, because we've heard the same thing about Hillary herself and her abuse of the Secret Service protective detail and various underlings and minions that she treats rather brusquely. Now, over in Great Britain, their government has just passed new laws that retroactively exempt GCHQ, police, and other intelligence officers from prosecution for hacking into personal computers and mobile phones. In other words, yes, they were breaking the law, but no, we're not going to prosecute them for that. We're going to change the laws. It's now legal. And there was no public debate on any of this. All of these governments, enslaved to private central banks, have driven their populations down into abject poverty, and now they are afraid. Because this push to create a single global banking empire, a new world order, has set the stage for a single global revolution, all at the same time. And that's why all these governments are spying on us, even though the founding principles of the nation saying you're not supposed to do that. Certainly here in the United States of America. They're afraid of you. They're afraid. The one thing the federal government cannot handle, even with Jade Helm, is 300 million Americans standing up at the same time and saying, you are fired, you are fired, you are fired, clean out your desk, leave the silverware and the flatware, get out of our government buildings. We're going to start this nation over again. Back on the founding principles of a limited government that minds its own business. That government governs best, which governs least, is a founding principle of this nation. We have a government today that tickets you for collecting rain on your own property. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, Mitch McConnell is out there whining and crying over proposals to limit the government's ability to spy on our emails, our phone calls, our computers, to watch us through our webcams, so forth and so on, saying that, you know, these limits on surveillance will force the U.S. to go dark. And basically saying that without it, they will lose a tool to combat the terrorist threat from overseas. Well, Mitch, you're a tyrant's wet dream. What can I tell you? First, under the Fourth Amendment, the government is not allowed at will to peek into our private lives, drool over naked pictures of our lovers, steal our business secrets, all of which they've been caught doing. Second, how does spying on Americans inside the United States of America deal with a foreign terrorist threat? Little bit of a disconnect there. Third, in 12 years of living under the tyranny of the NSA, TSA, DHS, FBI, CIA, they have not actually prevented any terror attacks. Yes, they have set up a bunch of innocent patsies to be arrested for propaganda purposes, but they haven't caught any real terrorists. And the reason is simple. As we demonstrated on our website 6 times, anyone with modest programming skills can write systems of encryption the NSA will not be able to break. And that means this entire surveillance system, unconstitutional and illegal, that Mitch is so in love with, is only able to spy on law-abiding citizens. That makes it a hideous waste of time, money, manpower, unless spying on law-abiding citizens is the actual agenda. So, Mitch McConnell, I will make you a deal. We, the people, will allow total surveillance over our phone calls and emails and texts as soon as all members of Congress allow we, the people, the same access to your emails, phone calls, and texts. Fair enough? Somehow, I don't think I'm going to get a reply on that. But that's the attitude of the government. They have a right to spy on absolutely everything that we are doing because we're all terrorist threats. But we have no business looking into what the government is doing with our money, with our country, with our children. It's none of your business. Go back to work, slave. Now, a former judge, this is an article coming out of Refreshing News 99, former judge, don't be fooled by the USA Freedom Act. It won't stop government spying. He's absolutely right. Because the USA Freedom Act merely transfers the functions of data collection and storage from government agencies to private corporations. It is a dodge. It's a fraud. It is a hoax to lull you, the American people, into a false sense of privacy so that you will not take steps to protect your business secrets, naked pictures of your lovers, or whatever, from government spying. That's all it is. We will not have privacy in this country until all of these data centers are shut down, the hardware in there sold off for surplus, the remains burned to the ground, and everybody in the intelligence community who violated the Fourth Amendment, and Fifth Amendment, and Ninth Amendment, and Tenth Amendment be tarred, feathered, hanged, drawn, quartered, burned at the stake, and the ashes peed on by a rabid wombat. Then we'll have privacy again. Now, the members of Congress who are supporting this USA Freedom Act, this hoax, have gotten twice as much money from intelligence contractors as those members of Congress opposed to it. They're selling out. They're selling out your constitutionally guaranteed privacy in exchange for 30 pieces of silver. This is a bizarre story, and I understand from the government's point of view why this was so, but this is a story carried over in blacklisted news. Apparently, at one point, documents have surfaced in The Guardian. At one point, the British police were actually worried that Trekkies, Star Trek fanatics, might be a threat. They were actually labeled as a possible threat by British police along with viewers of the TV series X-Files, because they're thinking strange alien thoughts about society, which is a big part of what science fiction is supposed to do. New perspectives. The original Star Trek from the 1960s was a huge success because it was addressing social issues of the time, and by placing them way out among the stars, made it politically acceptable to talk about it. They talked about racism, prejudice, sexism. That was really what made the show so popular. If you look at it today, I mean, certainly in terms of its production values, you know, it was very, very simple. I mean, it was cutting edge for the 1960s, but it wasn't the spaceship and the special effects that made the show work. It was a mirror onto our world. It wasn't about a future society. It was 1960s America on a starship. Wagon train to the stars. That was Gene Roddenberry's pitch that sold the show. And today's Star Treks are certainly amazing in their technical production qualities, but they don't cross those lines about social commentary to the same degree the original did. And there's a reason for that. Star Trek was canceled in its third season. It was supposed to be canceled after 1 year, but there was this intense letter-writing campaign to NBC that got it back on the air. So NBC did an on-air announcement, yes, we're bringing it back next season. And in the third season, they moved it to late Friday night, where their target demographic was going to be at high school football games and various other things. They basically killed the show off. And the reason they did was money. Star Trek had incredibly high Nielsen ratings, but very low Burke scores. Now, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, a Nielsen rating is a rating of how many people are watching the show. The Burke score is a rating of how much the audience watching that show remembered the commercials. Because those commercials are what power the network. When you ask, what does TV sell? TV sells you, your mind, in a psychologically receptive state for those commercials. That's why commercials can cost more to produce than the entire show surrounding them. They really are the best produced things on television. I worked in commercials for a lot of years. And the problem with the original Star Trek was it was raising questions in the audience mind, and they would be talking about the questions through the commercials, and that's why NBC got rid of it, and that's why the power elite viewed Trekkies as a possible threat. They were thinking about society and whether it was right or wrong to be doing certain things. Wars, racism, sexism. Along with that list of 77 other indicators here in the United States of America, at this point, I think pretty much everybody in the country qualifies as a potential terror threat. And that's why they're spying on us. You know, gun lovers. And somebody came out here saying that Snowden enthusiasts are liberty extremists. If you want privacy and liberty, you're now considered an extremist by the U.S. government. No, we're not extremists. It's the ones who think we should all be controlled and caged and spied on and live by permission of the government. They're the extremists. They're trying to go back to a modern version of feudalism and serfdom where you have to have government permission to do anything at all. And that absolutely is tyranny. Latest poll is showing that the majority of Americans are against the Patriot Act. No surprise there. Americans want their freedom. They have a rich tradition of freedom going back to the Revolution and the Bill of Rights. Now, ICANN is still out there pushing for the Internet to be privatized and taken out of U.S. government control by the end of the year. U.S. companies are throwing a fit because they're losing control over the Internet. More and more nations are setting up their own parallel nets that do not go through U.S. companies out of fear of NSA spying. And they did it to themselves. The NSA has not made this country more secure because the real cyber criminals are finding all of those back doors the NSA has put into our routers, our tablets, our smartphones, our BIOS. And they're using them against us. We're actually less secure thanks to the NSA. We'll be right back after the news break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is still in our control room, hand hovering over the telephone, ready to swoop on down and answer it when you call on in to the show here. Now, getting on back down to the Garland shooting, where these two patsies were apparently encouraged by a known FBI informant to carry out an attack on Pamela Geller's Let's Make Fun of Islam cartoon contest. Now, when the story first came out, it was that these two guys headed into the building and were stopped by a security guard. And even back then, I posed the question, why was this security guard's name not being released? They were saying he was a big hero. Let's see him. Let's give him his due. Now, the story has changed. This is over 21st Century Wire. And apparently, the new story coming from the U.S. government is that these two shooters were stopped by an armed SWAT team that was on the premises. Okay? Now, given that this whole shooting incident was over and done with in a grand total of 15 seconds, how did the SWAT team know to be there? How was it they were already in position to deal with these guys? And remember, we know that the shooters were being nurtured along by an undercover FBI informant for years before they were put into play, which, by the way, should be a reminder to everybody listening to this show who is, in fact, an FBI informant. They'll sacrifice you. They'll set you up and kill you anytime they feel they need a dead body or a dead patsy. Just something to be reminded about. Now, up in Chicago, there's still a lot of anger over this Homan Square torture facility, where the Chicago police were taking people who were arrested without a trace. There was no record of where they were. Lawyers couldn't find them. Family couldn't find them. No habeas corpus. They were literally tortured, trying to get confessions out of them, including waterboarding, anal rape in some cases, for hours, days even. The city of Chicago is having to pay millions and millions of dollars in damages. But apparently the city of Chicago is not able to learn from past mistakes. Because according to this story that we're seeing over here in RINF.com, there are allegations that the abuse at Homan Square is continuing to this very day. This is basically the equivalent of a CIA black site, like we had in Abu Ghraib, right here in the United States of America. They are using torture on American citizens. That's how far we have fallen from our original constitutional republic. Another article, this came out of strategicculture.org. America refuses to face up to its death squads in blue. Well, not around here. We're facing up to them, but that is the reality. We have death squads in the streets of the United States of America, in uniform with fancy buttons and badges and military hardware, who are killing 55 times as many innocent Americans as terrorists are. Now, the other week I made an observation. For the public to think they live under a just system, we must see the guilty punished and the innocent protected. But when punishment is inflicted seemingly at random onto the general population, that's not law enforcement, that's not justice, that's political repression. It's beating us down. It's just like the overseers on the southern plantations who would wade into the uppity slaves and just start clubbing them at random, whether they were doing anything wrong or not. It's all about keeping them down. And the black population is justly angry, and the white population needs to wake up and realize we're being herded in with them. We're all being treated this way. This is not a racial issue. It's a domination issue. It's a brutality issue. Now, over in Richland, Mississippi, good times there for the police department. They've got a brand new $4.1 million police station, a top-level police training center, a brand new fleet of black and white Dodge Charger police cars. How did they pay for it all? Civil forfeiture. Plundering their own people to build themselves a new police empire. All of that. Millions of dollars worth of equipment. All of it plundered from the people. Civil forfeiture. From people who committed no crime. Oh, you've got too much cash. We are going to assume that you're up to no good. And just take it. Our police departments, our local governments are surviving on the pillage of the American people. Now, the police have tried to restore their public image by pointing out that police officers are killed in the line of duty. And yes, some are. Nowhere near the number of innocent Americans who are being killed in the same time. I think the ratio is something like 50 cops to every 1,000 Americans. And parallel with that are renewed calls to ban guns to protect the lives of the police officers. But a report issued by Everytown for Gun Safety shows that the majority of police were killed by people who had illegal guns, prior criminal records. They were prohibited from owning a gun. Which is a reminder, gun control only disarms the law-abiding citizen. And history has shown time and time again, whether it's Australia or Great Britain, when you ban law-abiding citizens from owning firearms, crime goes up. Violent crime goes up. Rape goes up. And the police are not there to protect you. They're too busy writing out these $290 tickets for using your cell phone while driving, at least around here. Remember that case out of Georgetown? Guys broke into this townhouse shared by 3 women, spent the entire night sexually abusing them. They'd called 911, cops never showed up. These 3 women sued the police department for not coming and saving them, and the court said, there's no obligation. The police are under no legal obligation to protect you from violent crime. You're on your own out there, but you're not allowed to have a gun to protect yourself. Because gun control is the theory that a woman lying raped and strangled with her own pantyhose in an alley is morally preferable to that same woman explaining to the cops how her attacker got shot. That's the way they think. We have to ban guns, and yes, people will die, but it's a small price to pay for a gun-free society. Except, of course, the criminals will always have guns. It's another item for the smugglers to bring into the country, along with all the drugs. Or Fast and Furious, you can get your guns from them. Or you can build guns. And it's getting easier and easier to build guns. Now, there's one piece of good news in that a federal appeals court has chastised the police in Toledo, Ohio, for arresting and handcuffing a guy who was carrying a legal firearm. And the cop said, you can't walk around with a gun like that. And the judge said, yeah, actually he can. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about guns and gun rights here. It is an amazing issue. Apparently the ATF just confiscated 3,000 guns from Stag Arms for supposed violations of the National Firearms Act. And at specific issue were manufactured lower receivers for AR-15 and similar weapons that were in their warehouse without serial numbers. They were not being sold or transported. Now, the actual holder of the federal firearms license for Stag facility said that the employee who does the serialization was on vacation. And so, yeah, they were just making the receivers and stacking them in the warehouse, and that's actually not a crime. It's a crime only if you make an unserialized lower receiver and you sell or give it to another party. That is the crime. Having an unserialized receiver in your own possession. But that didn't stop the ATF from trying to grab the guns. They are really very, very worried that Americans are arming themselves. In fact, every time Obama or anybody in Congress comes out with, we've got to ban guns, gun sales go through the roof. Because we understand that governments that ban guns intend to do bad things to the population whose guns they're taking away. Every genocide of the 20th century was preceded by a gun ban on the targeted population, without exception. Now, over in Oklahoma, there's a big fight brewing over the governor's veto of their gun reform bill, where basically the bill prohibits private entities from banning guns in rented public spaces and streets. Oklahoma has legal carry laws, and there were private entities saying, we're going to have a gun-free zone here, even though they were using public property, public streets, and public facilities. And this bill simply said, if you're on public property, you can't ban guns, because legal carry is legal in Oklahoma. The governor vetoed that bill. Now the Oklahoma legislature is gearing up to overturn that veto. It's getting very intense. Now, up in Washington, D.C., a little bit of good news. As you know, many years ago, Washington, D.C. had a strict gun ban because those people in the United States Congress and the White House, they're very nervous that people don't like them in this country. So we'll just take away their guns, and that was declared unconstitutional. Then there was a big fight over concealed carry, and there was a law finally passed saying that you could have a concealed carry gun with a permit issued by the city of Washington, D.C. But to get that permit, you had to demonstrate why you needed to carry a concealed weapon. You're a courier for a diamond merchant, or you work in a bank or something like that. A federal judge has just overturned that, saying that no, if concealed carry is legal, permits must be issued. You're not allowed to say, yes, this guy deserves a gun and that one doesn't. And by the way, have you noticed throughout the years that all these people against concealed carry will carry concealed themselves? Dianne Feinstein, absolute gun grabber, carries concealed. Has a gun with her all the time. Now, as you probably heard, there's been a major altercation down in Waco, Texas, where a couple of biker gangs got together for some kind of a confab. Things spun completely out of control. There was a mass shootout, and some people were killed. And immediately they're out there saying, oh, see, this is why we have to ban guns. Like, do you really think bikers are going to follow the gun laws? Of course they aren't. We need a 15-day waiting period for a Harley Davidson. That'll solve the problem here. Now, here's an interesting little story. This was actually published in the Jewish Ledger, no less. There's a Spanish-language TV station in Iran, and it partners with Venezuela's networks, and they broadcast a report that Israel's aid into Nepal was actually a cover for baby trafficking, because Israel has a huge business in surrogate mothers, where these very rich Israeli couples want to have a kid, but the woman doesn't want to have to go through that whole messy pregnancy delivery thing. So they hire women in Nepal who are poor to be artificially impregnated, carry the baby to term, and then take the baby back to Israel. And apparently, according to this report, Israel's much touted humanitarian rescue mission into Nepal was to grab the kids who were waiting to come to Israel and get them out of there. And Israel took a huge amount of flack for this humanitarian aid mission into Nepal. At the same time, they are continuing to starve the people of Gaza and seize more land in the West Bank. It's those double standards and hypocrisies that are going to be your undoing. The public expects, in fact, the public demands consistency in policy by government. If we have freedom of speech, it applies to everybody. If we're going to be kind and humanitarian to these people, we must be kind and humanitarian to them all. Now, apparently, this is causing a bit of a ruffle. We're all sick and tired of Common Core. We understand Common Core is brainwashing our kids to think the Constitution and the Bill of Rights says something that it absolutely does not. We're certainly appalled by these horrible Michelle Obama lunches being forced on our school kids. And now they're getting ready to go one more step. President Obama's Education Secretary, Arne Duncan, is actually proposing boarding schools for the public school system in which your kid will go in on Monday and you will not see them until Friday night. I imagine they'll probably recycle some old Army bases for that. Put the kids in the barrack, indoctrinate them constantly. Not even give the parents a chance to find out what they're being taught and challenge it. Texas, and I have to tip my hat to the people in Texas, they used to be their own country. They got stolen by the United States. They've never forgotten that. They've never forgiven it. Sometimes they continue to act like they're their own country. They even bill themselves. The tourism ads for Texas, like a whole nother country. And yeah, it is. Texas has introduced a bill into their legislature, Senate Bill 445, which, if passed, will ban all implementation of the United Nations Agenda 21 program within the state's borders. This, of course, will put them directly at odds with the federal government in Washington, D.C., which thinks Agenda 21 is just all hunky-dory, and we should all embrace having somebody else tell us how to live our lives and how much energy we can have and constantly guilt us for human-caused global warming. By the way, One of the reasons California is suffering a huge water crisis is that 2 of the state's largest aquifers have become contaminated by fracking waste. And a lot of people are asking if some of the other aquifers are also tainted. Well, you don't have to worry about that anymore. California is not going to test any more of their water wells for fracking contamination. Problem solved. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as is usual for this part of our program, we're going to talk about human-caused global warming. Don't you all feel guilty? You're destroying the world with your heat. There's no more snow and ice because of your sins, and you will atone by buying carbon credits and paying carbon taxes and letting Agenda 21 tell you how to live your lives. If you are living in Metro Detroit, be aware there is a frost advisory in effect for southeast Michigan. Temperatures will slide into the low 30s overnight, according to the National Weather Service. Michigan's Upper Peninsula getting snow. I saw a picture of it. It looks like they're all the way back in winter. Same thing in Wisconsin. There was an amazing photo of the spring flowers and hummingbird feeders dusted with snow. I'm sorry, it's not snow. It's global warming powder. Or global warming dandruff. Or white lumpy rain, or whatever euphemism they're going to use here. Over in Colorado, strong storm drops, heavy rain, front range snow in the mountains there. And we're coming up on Memorial Day weekend, and they're looking at snow. I had somebody write into me and say, oh, come on, it's not unusual to have snow and frost. When I was a kid, we had snow and frost. Yeah, I understand that. The point is, back in 2000, the carbon Nazis were screaming, snow and ice are a thing of the past because of human-caused global warming. Doesn't look like it. Now, there's an interesting little story from What's Up With That. And they're talking about NASA's Dr. Gavin Schmidt. Now, remember, I used to work for NASA, and I know what NASA really means. Never a straight answer. And this article is going on about how Dr. Gavin Schmidt is still out there making media appearances to sell the most holy revealed dogma of human-caused global warming and how we're all going to die horribly unless we let the government tell us how to run our lives and agree to pay carbon taxes. But every time he's going to be on the media with a skeptic like Dr. Roy Spencer, Gavin will literally hide out. And they had this situation, WUWT, where they had him interviewed, and then Dr. Roy Spencer was going to come on, and Gavin basically left the set. Didn't want to dare be asked a question. Same thing with John Stossel. Didn't dare be there and be asked any questions. And apparently all of these people who pushed human-caused global warming, they can't answer the questions of why we had an early hard winter that has lasted to Memorial Day. Why down in Australia they're already seeing indications of an early hard winter there. And all they have are these very expensively produced charts and graphs of saying, see, the world is warmer. The world is really... Pay no attention to all that snow and ice here. You were just hallucinating all of that stuff here. It's just record temperatures all over. They're really raising on a busted flesh here. And the lesson to take away from this is that, yes, there are wide-ranging conspiracies to deceive you. We've got one staked out naked on the ground for you to study and learn from. Because this conspiracy to convince you the world was getting warmer and you are to blame included government agencies like NASA and NOAA, the United Nations, IPCC, academic institutions like the University of East Anglia, Penn State, and Mother Nature went the other way. And real scientists would have said, oh, the world is getting cooling. False alarm, we'll find something else to do. But they're pushing this because it isn't science, it's politics, it's agenda. They're trying to sell you on the idea of subservience to some kind of a global environmental authority without which the world is doomed. The world is not doomed. Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years. It's got another 6 billion to go. All we can do is mess ourselves up, and we're doing a really good job of that. which gets me onto this next story. Down in Michigan, and I did mention this, I think, either yesterday or last week, but I want to hit this one again. This baby died in Michigan. The mother was told, asphyxiation of an undetermined origin, take the baby's body and go home. That was it. And the mother decided she was not happy with that. She hired 3 pathologists to conduct autopsies on the remains of her son. All 3 agreed it was caused by asphyxia induced by multiple vaccines. Now, you remember when we had Michelle Rosen on the show, the lengths to which Johnson & Johnson and the government and the media lied to protect the profitability of their corporation. Same thing with big pharmaceutical. They don't want you to think their products aren't safe and effective. People might stop using them. People are stopping using them. And that's why now, under the principle that if the public won't voluntarily buy what we want to sell them, we'll get the government to make them do it. So we had that California bill saying parents must vaccinate their children. Another one just like it down in Florida. A national bill now being proposed, because our entire economy right now is being propped up, where we have dangerous, ineffective junk products. We don't want to buy them, so the government says, well, we'll just force them to buy the product. That'll stimulate the economy. Go out and buy this thing that you don't need and don't want, and that gets money in circulation. That gets you to spend all that money you're hoarding underneath your bed. That's their thinking right now. And as I said before, if vaccinations had a track record of safety and efficacy, there wouldn't be an issue. But the reality is otherwise. Coincident with these massive vaccine assaults on our children, we've seen a soaring epidemic of autism. We're seeing incredible numbers of people suffering from peanut anaphylaxis, where if they're exposed to a peanut, they can die. Where did that come from? Well, they use peanut oil as a vaccine adjuvant. Now, peanut oil is something you're supposed to eat and digest, not inject into your veins. They just had another vaccine disaster in Mexico. 57 kids given a 3-way vaccine. 2 died, 29 in the hospital. We have a right to be cautious about this. We have a right to decide for ourselves what medicines we're going to take and not take, and not live under a government that is forcing us to take vaccines because it makes money for their buddies in the big pharmaceutical industries. Plus, there is that other issue. What else is in those vaccines we're not being told about? It was only a couple of months ago they had another scandal down in Kenya where they were vaccinating women for typhus, and the vaccine included a chemical to permanently render them incapable of bearing children. And we know the money junkies, now that they've got all the wealth up there, they want the rest of us to go away. Anyway, apparently latest research into statins, if you're on statins, it'll double your risk of diabetes. There's a healthy, beneficial medication there. Let's see. I want to skip on down here because there's a story I want to get to before the end of the show here. There we are. There's this story coming out of governmentslaves.info, and they're talking about this guy, Jerry Rossman. He's a pig farmer in Iowa, and he had the pig farm, and he had a field of corn that he grew to feed to his pigs. More about this when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about this pig farmer in Iowa, Jerry Rossman, who's raising his pigs, and he had some neighboring farm fields, and so he grows his own corn to feed to his pigs, and apparently got talked into cultivating Roundup Ready and BT corn, and fed this to his pigs. And within a single generation, all of the sows became infertile, could not produce new pigs, and he has been driven into bankruptcy. And by the way, if you get a chance to catch that John Oliver's Last Week Tonight about chicken farming, you need to take a look at that to see how these farmers are abused by the giant food corporations. Now, what's going on with the pigs? We know that research has shown that GMO in general can lead to infertility and reproductive problems. But there's another aspect we ought to be looking at, and that is the epicite gene. Now, the epicite gene is a gene in corn that renders whoever eats it incapable of reproduction. This was actually intentionally developed under a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It was then acquired by the GM companies, including Monsanto. Anybody who eats this corn cannot have children. That's what it's designed to do. And pig biology and human biology are close enough together where the epicite gene might, in fact, sterilize pigs who eat it. And if that epicite gene has broken into the wild, we're looking at some major, major problems. I mean, everybody's up in the air right now about the bird flu, and they're having to kill millions of chickens. We're looking at egg shortages, a turkey-free Thanksgiving. But if that epicite gene has gone wild, all livestock fed on corn that is contaminated by that gene will stop reproducing. Now, we've seen a sharp decline in the birth rate here in the United States of America ever since this corn was developed. And the birth rate decline has been most severe in the Hispanic population, who are the largest consumer of corn-based products. Now, we know that nobody in corporations or government is ever going to admit making a mistake this bad that could potentially become an extinction-level event. I'm sure that Monsanto's already coming out with a Roundup Ready pig and a Roundup Ready baby, that it underscores that this genetic technology is the most dangerous technology humans have ever experimented with. It is far more dangerous than even nuclear energy, because we're tinkering with the code of life itself, and it's being deployed and sold recklessly around the globe. And even as people become very concerned about it and say, I don't want it, we're seeing these giant corporations saying, yes, you will buy this. This is what we want to sell you. We don't care what you want to buy. This is what we're going to make you buy and eat. And I think there's a concern there. We need to find out if that epicite gene has broken into the wild. We know that this little buffer zone that the GM companies recommend around farm fields with GMO crops it's a joke. There was that story up where the wheat farmers up in Oregon were suddenly unable to sell their wheat because it was tainted with GMO when tested. And they found out it was contaminated by pollen from a non-approved strain of GMO wheat from several states away. And that is the real risk of GMO crops. Once it gets out there, it's going to be everywhere. And when you're deliberately creating genes to end the ability to reproduce, and if that got into the wild, and that's the reason why all the livestock that is feeding on this corn is all of a sudden unable to reproduce, you've got a real problem on your hands. Needless to say, there's a surge in imports of GM-free crops. Americans want GM-free. And as long as they're allowed to know whether or not their food is GM-free or not, they're preferring to buy it. And they're willing to spend extra money to get it, because it does have to be imported. There's almost no GM-free left in this country because of all this contamination from the wind, from birds, from insects. They're having to bring the crops in from other countries that have banned GMO. Now, here in the United States, the California counties of Mendocino, Trinity, and Marin have banned GM crops. Doesn't mean the pollen isn't going to drift in from neighboring counties, unfortunately. Several Australian states have bans on GM crops. The Japanese people are staunchly opposed to GM crops. No GM seeds are allowed anywhere in the country. They're trying to ban crops that are grown with GM in other countries, like canola. New Zealand has a complete ban on GM. Germany, there's a ban on the cultivation or sale of GMO corn. Ireland has banned GM cultivation since 2009. There is a voluntary labeling system for foods containing GM food to be identified as such. But if that transatlantic trade and investment partnership deal goes through, that will now be illegal. That is in both these treaties. That food will not be labeled as to whether or not it contains GM contents. This is not just saying you cannot have a label on there saying contains GM. They're even saying you cannot have a label that says contains no GM. Austria, Hungary, Greece, Bulgaria, Luxembourg, ban on cultivation and sale of all GMOs. France initially allowed Monsanto's GM corn, but forbid it after 2008. Let's see. Madeira, in Portugal, there's a ban. Switzerland bans all GM crops. India, last-minute ban. After that disaster with BT cotton, they're taking a very, very stern attitude toward it. Hungary went to the point of literally torching, burning to every field where GM had been planted to make sure that pollen was destroyed. That's how afraid they are. And they have reason to be afraid. We live in a country where corporations with money are able to sell you dangerous products because, hey, it makes money, and they're able to basically buy the Congress to say, yeah, this is okay for you to eat. We're going to feed it to your kids in the school in the Michelle Obama lunches, and we are going to make it a crime for you to know what is in the food you eat. Even Hitler didn't go into your house and say, you will eat this and you will not eat that. That's how far we've gone. Interesting article came out here from naturalnews.com reminding everybody that the Centers for Disease Control is not, in fact, a government agency. It likes to pretend it is, like the Federal Reserve. It is a for-profit corporation. It's listed in Dun & Bradstreet's database as a for-profit corporation. And if you look at their list of partners, you will find all the major pharmaceutical industries. And this is probably why, when the CDC put out their report claiming to prove that vaccines were unconnected with autism, and then a couple of years later you had the scientists who wrote the report come out and say it was a fraud, it was a complete fake. They cherry-picked the data. The CDC is not about public health. It's there to convince you that what these products that are being sold are safe for you, that it's okay. And if it makes you sick, we've got another pill for you. Or if it kills your baby, well, you shook the baby. It's shaken baby syndrome. We're going to take these parents who just lost their baby to the pharmaceutical problem, and we're going to throw them in jail. Because above all else, we must protect the profitability of these big corporations. That's fascism. That is fascism, when government and corporations are aligned together against the general population to the point where innocent people are sacrificed to protect corporate profits. That is fascism. That's where we are right now. There's the music. Time for me to get some work done on the new website. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay informed. Go ahead and get angry. You deserve it. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.